what in Venezuela works is the community identification. So these community councils are a non-representative structure. Like this idea of setting up a parallel structure to liberal and representative democracy. And that's also something that is very characteristic for the whole process of Venezuela, and the big difference to other processes before revolutionary processes. But one is the idea of revolution as a process, not as an act, where you just take over and then everything is supposed to change, but as some kind of revolution. So, or revolution, it takes time for change, and it's also a strong culture of change. And in contrast to classical and orthodox Marxism, it's stressing very much on subjectivity. Like the traditional Marxism said, no, it's all about materialism. It's change materialist conditions and then everything is fine. And no, in Venezuela they're stressing very much on subjectivity. It means, for example, the first 2 years, now we've got all these big changes, but the first 2 years of Chavez in power, nothing really changed on the materialistic side for the people. But in the next elections, even more voted for Chavez. Why? That's the meaning of subjectivity. Because Chavez, the first 2 years, was every day on TV, and every talk and every speech he gave, he was always telling the people, your knowledge is worth something. The police doesn't have the right to stop you on the street just because you look like you're poor. We need your initiative, and everybody has to participate. You have the right to walk all over the city, and even if you look like poor, nobody can tell you don't have the right to walk in certain parts of the city. So it was some kind of empowerment. And that is important, because many times it's not easy to imagine it for us that we grew up with certain privileges or in certain societies where these class and race differences are not that strong. It's not easy to understand for us that if you're part of an historical memory, you were told like 500 years that what you are doing and what you know is worth nothing, it's a big step to get back your self-confidence in what you know and your knowledge and popular knowledge. And so it's a very important, it's a very important thing. So this subjectivity, I think it is in the center. That is also a quite important point in the Venezuelan process. So we have this participation in the community councils. How do they work? The community councils are for a certain area, for like a non-representative, like I said, a parallel construction, like Gramsci said, constructing new before the old dies, and not just simply destroying the old and then trying to make something new. And that was an idea right from the start. All the social missions, for example, so-called missions, the so-called social programs, they worked the same way. They were setting up a social program, for example, the one about the health services, while still the old health services exist. At the same time, you set up these new ones, they grow until they're so big that you integrate the old ones into the new ones. Same thing, they didn't destroy the old universities. The old public universities are still there, are still very exclusive and elitist, because who knows about many parts of Latin America, the neoliberal process produced the contradiction that people going to public school didn't have the qualification later to qualify for the exams to access to public university. So the ones in public universities are usually the middle class or upper middle class children, because they had the possibility to go to private school and then pass the exams for access to public university, while the ones going to private universities, and many of the private universities are really bad quality in Latin America, were the ones out of the poor families, because the whole family was putting money together to send at least one kid to some university and have some diploma or some degree. So these old public universities are still there. But at the same time, they set up a new university system where now there are more than 500,000 students in this new university system. Out of 27 million inhabitants Venezuela has, they will still exist. I don't know if someday they might be put together, these university systems or whatever, but it's always this idea to creating the new as a parallel process. Same with all this direct democracy. Liberal democracy is still full and alive and kicking in Venezuela. And it will probably be for the next decades, because we know nowadays it's not an easy thing. You can't just... so generally in the world, people think that liberal democracy is the only democracy. So you can't just eliminate liberal democracy, because we also know that if you're classified as a non-democratic country today, what that means, it's a high chance, if you're not a friend of the US, to get bombed. So it won't be happening for sure for the next, whatever, 10, 20 years that they get rid of liberal democracy. But they're building at the same time this kind of direct democracy. These community councils, and now I finally come to the point, how they're working. It's in urban areas, it's 150 to 400 families or living units that form one. In rural areas, about 20, and in indigenous areas, about 10. And it means if we would, for example, well, if this would be a house where people would be living, it would be probably one community council, because it's so big. So we would just, anybody of us, a little group, could call for a first assembly and just starting defining, so what is our neighborhood? So then we decide, okay, it's this building, I'm going to build a community council. Then we look, we call for another assembly where at least 20% of the people have to attend and decide, is this the area for our community council? Okay, what kind of committees do we have? We might have a cultural committee and a health committee and whatever. Maybe we have some unemployed people, so we might have a local communal economy committee, and whatever we want or we need. And then we will call the whole community for elections to elect for every committee that exists one spokesperson. And also 5 people in charge of the finances we get as community councils, and 5 controlling all the finances and the ones in charge of the finances. And like I said, they're spokespeople. That means they're not allowed to decide anything. Every decision would be taken by our assembly in the House. The committees work about projects, then they present the projects to the assembly. The assembly decides about the priorities. We might have a project that, okay, we're going to do roof gardening, and another one says, no, it's much more important to have a basketball court in the 6th floor. And then the community might decide, okay, first priority is the basketball court. When we get this, we might present the next project, or health services, or whatever. And the whole community elects these spokespeople. And I said they don't have any right to decide anything, but all decisions are taken by the assembly. Then the spokespeople, they're the ones in charge to pass on the projects, the ideas, the community projects, to the institutions. There is one central institution financing all the projects of the community councils, but at the same time, every institution in Venezuela is called to finance and support community councils projects. And we're not talking about peanuts. Like during the last years, about 5% of the national budget went directly to the communities. So we're talking about sums like about around $6 or $7 billion a year. Nowadays, there are about 40,000 community councils existing all over Venezuela. And I'm sure among these 40,000, there are probably quite a few that are not working, that are not really participative. You might have cases of corruption. For sure, you might have everything you have also on an institutional level. But it's anyway much easier to control and to prevent if it's all your neighbors and you have to talk everything in assembly and control it, than if it's done by an institution where you don't have the access to the finances, to the books, and to everything. So it doesn't mean that they're not automatically better or nicer people. And I always say what they did in Venezuela is change the government, not the population. So